Hello, welcome to Walk in the Park. My name is Tony Ingram, your host, and this episode is recorded on July 16th, 2014, episode 81. Now, we have obviously a lot of shows. If you want to see other Walk in the Park shows, including one similar to this one, which I'll get to later, just go to my vid blog, as I call it, walkinpark.com, and they're all there, and you can find them. There's search criteria and so forth. So, this time we are going to talk about Hanging Valley Waterfalls. Now, that's not the name of a waterfall, that is a phenomenon, waterfalls that are created in a particular way. So, we happen to have a lot of them around Ithaca here. Let's take a look at this beautiful drawing by local artist Francis Fawcett. Thank you very much, Francis, for allowing us to use this graphic. And you can see in the bottom is Cayuga Lake. So we're looking from the north, way up in the air, imagining, to the south, and you see this long valley that continues up to the top of the picture. That is the Cayuga Valley, and this was a trough dug out by glaciers and during the Ice Age, and it left these steep sides on the valley side, and steep valley sides, I should say, and waterfalls have formed on the streams that are flowing into that steep, deep trough, valley trough, Cayuga Lake trough, and that continues like another 20 miles south of Cayuga Lake itself. So these little streams that were flowing along at the end of that were flowing along just historically. The Ice Age came along, the glaciers came along, dug out the Cayuga Valley, and these little valleys were left hanging above. This is actually at Watkins Glen State Park, but it's the same story over there. These valleys were left hanging above. And the glaciers came through. They dug out the Cayuga Valley, as you can see in this other beautiful drawing by Francis Fawcett. Thank you very much again. And you can see there are waterfalls pouring off the side as the ice is retreating. And these valleys were created, the valleys that the streams pour out of are pretty much at the level they were before the ice came, but then they find themselves suspended above the lake level, which is lower than the valley was before the ice came. So we'll actually go take a look at some photographs now of our local falls from this perspective, and then we're going to compare them to some even more famous waterfalls. Looking in the air from west of Taughannock Falls, that's Taughannock Falls State Park there. You can see the gorge on the just to right of center. The waterfall would be just lower center, just the end of that rocky cliff there. You can't obviously see the waterfall from this perspective. And the gorge heads out to the lake. Now we're going to go out over the lake and look back, and here's Taughannock Point. So here is this gorge. This is a hanging valley gorge on the steep side of Cayuga Lake. So the stream has cut this gorge, this gully, back into that steep edge, and the eroded rock and soil over time since the Ice Age has been deposited in the lake. And in fact, this picture was taken by my friend Bill Hecht. Both of these pictures, by the way, a number of these pictures were taken by Bill Hecht. This, you can see that there's a plume of sediment that's pumping out into the lake, and over thousands of years, this process, after heavy runoff events like snowmelt or rains, heavy rains, has deposited this material in the lake, slowly building up Taughannock Point in what was otherwise very deep water. But that's another story. Here's a obviously a winter picture from the south looking at Taughannock Point. You can see the gorge in the steep side of the western bank or shore of Cayuga Lake. So you can imagine that the waterfall began right there, right of center where the point is and the highway goes along. Imagine the waterfall perhaps began right there at the end of the last episode of the Ice Age about 12,000 years ago, and has eroded its way back into the weak shales of the hillside, and is at its current location. Here's a picture that was taken by the state parks back in the 70s. And again, you can see Taughannock Point, and the gorge is winding its way back where the waterfall has receded from the face of the hill and has actually deposited in the lake the eroded material. Again, another aerial shot from Bill Hecht, and the gorge goes up to the upper left there. That's actually where the waterfall is. Here is looking in the shadow at the top of that bowl of rock there. In that shadow is Taughannock Falls. but sunny days are hard to get good exposure. Now here is from another photographer. This is actually called Photography 4D, so you can look them up on Facebook if you like. They have a Facebook page and a lot of other pictures there you might want to look at. But they have a drone that they take up, and they took this picture of Taughannock Falls, a hanging valley waterfall, as we call it. And I took this picture last month, and there was nice water on the falls from the trail, the end of the gorge trail going up. So this is a hanging valley waterfall. Let's look at some other hanging valley waterfalls in the Ithaca area, in the Ithaca Valley. We're going to fly down now with Bill Hecht again to the south of Ithaca and Cayuga Lake, and you'll be able to see there. You can see up in the upper center, you can see Cayuga Lake, and then just below that is the city of Ithaca, and below that is this hill, this brim of this hill. This is South Hill, the edge of South Hill, on the east or southeast part side of the Cayuga Valley that extends south from Cayuga Lake. And just left of center, there are a couple of gorges that drop off that hill. So this is, I love this picture because it's a great perspective of this hanging valley, this stream that flows from the uplands at a fairly level rate and then pours over the edge of the valley. This is now flying around the other side of the Cayuga Valley, looking back towards Buttermilk Falls, which is in the bottom center of the picture, and to the left of that is Owl Gorge, it's called, which is also in Buttermilk Falls State Park, but it's not a developed gorge. It's actually a route that the stream took, the larger stream took probably between episodes of the Ice Age, but that's another story for another time. So we'll now take another perspective. This is from West Hill, looking right in the center there. That is the hanging valley, plunging to the Cayuga Valley, hanging valley at Buttermilk Creek, plunging as Buttermilk Falls to the Cayuga Valley, then swing around to the other side again, going down to the left in that shadow there. That is the gorge of Buttermilk Falls, plunging off the hillside. This is again on the left of center. This is looking from the back, plunging off the hillside into Cayuga Lake as a hanging valley at Buttermilk Creek, and then down at the bottom looking straight on to the plunging waterfall, the hanging valley waterfall of Buttermilk Falls. A little closer up when it has a lot of water on it that makes it look kind of like buttermilk. Pretty cool, huh? So that's what a hanging valley is it's a valley suspended above the main valley that it empties into, that it's a tributary of, usually by glaciers, and digging out the main valley more than the side valley. And the waterfalls often form there, and in our case the waterfalls cut back into the weak shales fairly easily, so they've resaded back on the hillside. This picture, look, the upper right, well, obviously this is Cayuga Lake to the upper left, and then Cayuga Inlet in the center, going from the lower right to the upper left into Cayuga Lake. Cass Park at the bottom, to the left Treman Marina, Farmers Market's sort of right in the center, just right of the center. But up in the upper right there is Fall Creek. It's kind of hard to see, it's just a little dark spot there. So let's get another view of it. Obviously a different time of view. These are all aerials now, are all Bill Hecht's. So there's a Cornell campus in the upper right, and to the left of that is the Fall Creek Hanging Valley. And in the lower left, you can see that white area. That is Ithaca Falls, the waterfall at the end of Fall Creek Hanging Valley. And let's go around up above that waterfall just to the north. Looking at it, you can see the profile of the hill in the upper center there, plunging to the flats down in Ithaca, in the Cayuga Valley, in the Ithaca Falls, pouring over that, that junction of the valleys, and having cut back into the hillside. So again, right up close to the falls. Now, so see what else we got here. We're gonna compare our Hanging Valley waterfalls to much more famous Hanging Valley waterfalls. In fact, where I probably learned about them first is we're gonna go actually a couple of weeks ago. I think it was episode 79. Yes, it was all about Yosemite National Park. So we're going to go back to Yosemite National Park and take another look at it from the Hanging Valley waterfall perspective. So let's go back to California And in the center here is that little green splotch. That represents Yosemite National Park east of San Francisco. I actually flew to Fresno, which is right below it. And one of the reasons I am focusing a lot on Yosemite this summer is it is the 150th anniversary of the creation of the park. It originally was a state park and eventually became a national park. And it was the first place that was designated, first federal land designated wilderness area for the enjoyment of the public for the future. It sort of was the model eventually that became the national parks. So here's a map of the park, and you see a road going across, and then just below that, lower center, there is Yosemite Valley, and that's what most people think of when they think of Yosemite National Park, is this incredible view. Some of the most famous landscape features in the United States. To the left is El Capitan, which is a cliff that's 3,500 feet tall. In a later show, I'll talk a little bit more about that and actually show you people climbing it. And to the right, you might be able to make out a waterfall. In the dark area there, that's a waterfall. That is a hanging valley waterfall. So we'll take a look at some diagrams here that will help us win it. We'll go into the visitor center. Let's go in the visitor center. Okay. So this shows a glacier during the Ice Age. Just like we had glaciers in the Ice Age here, this time there was a mountain glacier during the Ice Age that dug out Yosemite Valley to the left there. And then on the right, you can see that waterfall, or actually it's right in the middle of this picture, is that waterfall. It's called Bridalveil Falls. And then there's this U-shaped valley or V-shaped valley above it. And that once had a glacier and it dug it out. But that glacier was smaller than the main valley glacier, didn't persist as long, and it didn't dig out the valley into a glaciated valley, U-shaped valley, as much as the main glacier, main valley did. So the main valley was dug deeper, more deeply, and this side valley with Bridalveil Falls in it was left hanging above the valley. So here's a photograph I took of it. On the right, you can see Bridalveil Falls pouring out of its hanging valley. There's another picture a little closer. And then I took a walk on the trail up to the base of Bridalveil Falls, which is a nice spot. It's a pretty high waterfall, quite a bit higher than Taughannock. I don't recall the exact height, but looked up to the top and down at the bottom, and there were some people playing around the boulders, which is a little risky because they're wet. And okay, so we're gonna take a look at another waterfall in Yosemite Valley, another hanging valley waterfall. This one, the tallest waterfall in North America. It's actually a set of about 3 falls, and it's Yosemite Falls. This pours out of another hanging valley in the Sierra Nevada mountains there, and the water comes down from melting snow high in the Sierra Nevadas and goes down through this relatively gently sloped valley to pour off 2,425 feet into Yosemite Valley, which is more than 10 times the height of Taughannock. Here's another view of it. You can see the upper falls right of center, and then to the lower left you may be able to make out the lower falls, and in between there's middle cascades. Total fall almost half a mile. So we're going to look at a couple of videos here. First we'll look at we'll see how much time we have, but this is a Park Minute video that I made of Yosemite Falls. So let's take a look at that. Yosemite Falls in Yosemite National Park in California is the tallest waterfall in North America. The combined height of the upper fall, the middle cascades, and the lower fall is 2,425 feet. Okay, so it's a pretty amazing place, Yosemite Falls. I was out there last month, and I hadn't been there in like 45 years, so it was fun to get back. And this is one of the first things that you, well, it is, well, yeah, one of the first things that you see when you come in the park. So, and it's right by the visitor center. Great, amazing place. I went there in June because there was still water on it because the snow melts in the high country, and usually by August there's little or no water flowing off of Yosemite Falls. So I'm going to do another video now. This one by the Yosemite Conservancy, and I actually got permission from the director of this film, but it's very nice. Yosemite Conservancy produced a bulletin they put out called Yosemite Nature Notes for many years, and then they stopped due to costs, but it was an excellent, a little natural history bulletin about the park. And then they decided to revive it a few years ago as a video to put up on YouTube and other places like that. So that's what they did, and they hired this guy, and he's been doing Yosemite Nature Notes. So this one is about Yosemite Falls. So let's go to it.
Water is asleep when it's in a pond. Water is drowsy when it's in a slow-moving river. But when water suddenly notices that the earth has gone away, it wakes up. And so a waterfall is water that has awakened. It's awakened to the reality that it's alive, and that it's flowing, and that it's moving through the air. And that awakening in the water seems to wake up something in us too.
Even lakes and rivers have that sort of draw for people, but it's not that often that you have a river that's free falling through the air. People have always just been attracted to waterfalls all around the world. And I think it's because it's not all that often that you see water just pitching through space.
When people think of waterfalls, especially here in Yosemite Valley, which has a very high concentration of high waterfalls, they tend to think of facts. They tend to think of Ribbon Fall, the highest single drop of water in North America, around 1,600 feet. They tend to think of Yosemite Falls, 2,425 feet, fifth highest waterfalls in the world. But the numbers don't add up to the beauty of those falls. Every fall has its own unique character. Every fall is water saying to the world, look, I can be different over here than I was over there. They have their own personality.
There's a lot of different waterfalls in this area. It depends on the time of the year you come here. The ones that are going right now would include Vernal Falls, Nevada Falls on the Merced River, Bridalveil Falls on Bridalveil Creek. There's some other smaller ones. But this one's named Yosemite Falls. It's the falls.
Well, I think it was given the name Yosemite Falls because it's the premier waterfall in Yosemite Valley. Bridalveil is a spectacular waterfall, so are Nevada Falls and Vernal Falls, but they're quite a bit smaller. Yosemite Falls is just right there. I mean, when you kind of turn the corner and you get your first view of it, it's amazing. It's the reason why people park their cars in the middle of the road and get out and start taking pictures, completely oblivious to everything else around them because it just dominates your attention. I live in Yosemite Valley. I live right underneath the waterfall, and you can bet that I look up at it every single morning when I step out the door. It's impossible not to be drawn to it.
People come out here, they're pulled out of their cars. They roll the windows down first. Then they can't get out through the window, so they open the door. Then they go out the door and they just start wandering off into the meadow, getting closer to the fall, getting closer to the creek, getting closer to the river. They can't help it.
People tend to want to get as close as they can to the edges of waterfalls, I guess, to experience that rush, that energy of the water going from a placid little stream to a raging, free-falling torrent.
People are drawn to waterfalls, and sometimes it's hard to know where that limit is as far as how close you are drawn to it.
This morning, a man asked me, is there a waterfall nearby that I could stick my head under? And you know, you get questions like that sometimes, and you have to be very careful how you answer them. I can't tell him, no, you can't stick your head under the waterfall. However, I could say, well, very slippery rocks all around the base, and it's a lot of water. It's potentially a very dangerous situation that you might be in.
Fortunately, with waterfalls, I think you can get a lot of appreciation from them even from a distance. I mean, here we are, over a mile away, and this waterfall is still phenomenal.
I remember talking to a visitor here. They asked me about Yosemite Falls, and they just said, excuse me, but Ranger, what's up there? I said, I beg your pardon? Well, I'm looking at that fall. Well, what's above the fall? And I said, well, above the fall, it's a creek. He said, a creek? I said, yeah, a creek. It's a creek that's kind of meandering, and then it reaches the edge of the valley, then it becomes a waterfall.
If you could imagine being a drop of water in Yosemite Creek, what would you go through before you got to that? Well, first of all, you would be melted snow, maybe around the Mount Hoffman, Tuolumne Meadows area.
There are a lot of small little lakes there. There's snow and ice that persists well into the summer in most years. And the melting snow and ice is basically what feeds Yosemite Creek.
Yosemite Creek is, it's flowing pretty quickly, but it's not a big creek. It's not a lot of big waterfalls, really, and pretty average forested terrain that it's flowing through.
And then it kind of turns the corner there and starts heading for Yosemite Valley. And what I always think is neat about Yosemite Creek is that as it's flowing along gently through that canyon, it has no idea what's ahead of it. It has no idea what it's about to do, which is suddenly and very abruptly reach the rim of Yosemite Valley and pitch off into a waterfall that's nearly 2,500 feet long.
When you look at Yosemite Falls, it's a journey. There's a beginning section, there's a middle section, and there's a conclusion. The beginning section is the most dramatic because that's where you're seeing it fall 1,400 feet from the rim down to that middle gorge. Once you're in that middle section, the part that I find very interesting is that it disappears. You know it's in there, but you can't really quite clearly see it. So even though that's probably the most photographed waterfalls in North America, there's a section of it that's sort of hidden from view, where it's kind of cutting into the rock. And then it comes out again at you at the lower Yosemite Fall and falls about another 300 feet, and we see that. So we see that lower stretch of 300 feet, we see that upper stretch of 1,400 feet, but there's 600 feet of mystery in there.
Over the course of the year, the waterfall changes a lot.
In winter, because the flows are low and temperatures are cold, there's a lot of opportunity for water to freeze as it comes over the edge of the falls. And as water goes to its vapor state, as can happen as it gets atomized, as it falls, that typically supercools the water, and you get ice forming on the cliff, but also at the base of the cliff.
And what will happen is when the sun comes up in the morning and strikes the cliff there at Yosemite Falls, it will start melting that ice, and then these big slabs of ice, I mean tens to hundreds of feet on a side, will come breaking off of the cliff and crashing down to the base of the falls, and they contribute to that big ice cone that's developed down there.
But in the spring, it starts waking up. And how you can tell that it's waking up is that you hear it really before you see it. There's this increase in volume in the sound of the fall.
And that also corresponds to springtime really arriving in full force in Yosemite Valley. So the meadows are green, the trees are leafed out, the dogwoods are flowering.
From this point on, the snowpack is melting. It's not accumulating. There's nothing more being added to it. And eventually by late July into August, these falls will essentially dry up.
Come here in the end of August and you probably won't see any water at all. You look at it now, it's kind of surprising that it runs out of water. So we call that an ephemeral fall. It doesn't run all the time.
Once the water has disappeared, you can no longer see it, you can no longer hear it, you can no longer feel its presence. You start forgetting about it. And you don't even look over because you know it's not there. And then there comes a night where there are clouds and there's a little bit of rain, and then you come in the next day, and then there it is.
It had been quiet and pretty much dry up there for months, and then that one big rainstorm rejuvenated the waterfall, and it was back, and it was thundering again. Even I was sort of overwhelmed by this presence that was back in my life. You know, it's like this friend of mine had been gone for months, and then it just shown up on the doorstep. It's like, wow, I missed you, and I didn't even realize it.
Sometimes I think the fall is never more beautiful than when you think it's gone forever. There's this sense that something that has passed away can return, that maybe there is life after death, because something that seems so categorically gone is just there all of a sudden, just overnight.
Okay. I said a couple of things I thought were interesting. One was, well, a lot of things that were interesting. One was that probably the most photographed waterfall in the United States. Well, I think Niagara Falls might have them on that one. And also it reminded me that talking about it disappearing and then forgetting about it, and then it comes back, and it's like, oh my gosh, it was like a reincarnation in a way. Or an old friend coming back. I feel that way about spring around here. Winter is so long that you forget that things actually are green like they are now. Okay, so that's where the big waterfalls are in North America, the biggest ones, the biggest hanging valley waterfalls, and they are comparable, as I said, to our waterfalls. Let me bring up Taughannock. You know, that is a hanging valley. Just like, well, not just like Yosemite, but very similar, and the term can be applied to both. So, well, we are running out of time here. I want to thank you all for coming and or for watching my show, and we'll see you again soon. So once again, this is episode 81, Walk in the Park, recorded in July 16th. If you want to see any more of our shows, go to walkinpark.com. They're all online. And have a good week or month or summer or whatever season it is you happen to be watching this.